Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the AML Incubator Weekly Vlog. If you're joining us for the first time, this is where we break down the sometimes complex world of compliance, anti-money laundering, financial crimes, scammers. I'm David Beckett, head of sales and partnerships.
And I'm Kateryna. I'm Chief Business Development Officer here at AMLI. And today we have a really special episode. We talk a lot about high-level regulations on this show, but today we really want to dive into the trenches and see how the actual operational work gets done.
Exactly. And we're thrilled to welcome one of our superstars here at AMLI, Kateryna. Kateryna is a compliance specialist specializing in two of the most critical areas of the industry, transaction monitoring and anti-terrorist financing. Kateryna, welcome to the Vlog.
Hello.
Let's
Nice to meet
actually
you.
jump right in. Yeah, nice to meet you too. So let's jump right in. So transaction monitoring. This is probably the heartbeat of any AML program. For our viewers who might not be in the weeds every day, maybe you can walk us through it. What does a typical day look like for you? And what makes the transaction suddenly flash red? Alert, this needs to be checked. What's going on there?
Actually, through my career, it changed a lot. Right now, we have IE. Like a lot of compliance specialists are afraid of IE. I'm the opposite. I think it helps in transaction monitoring and reviewing account right now a lot. So mainly companies have generated alerts either manually, they're putting them, or the IE system helps. After which we receive that something suspicious is happening, and this is where human comes. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't think we will ever lose the job because yesterday we even had a funny example of that.
Really, what happened?
So, not all suspicious activity is suspicious activity in the end of the story. Again, that's
False
why we have,
positive.
yes, false positive, false alerts. Like, for example, one of the most common red flags is a fast money movement on account. So, for example, total withdrawal of funds. You receive from external to big amount, and then suddenly, with small amounts, it goes to different accounts. So again, it's the most common red flag. But in the same time, people receive salaries, and what do they do when they receive salary? They start paying their bills for the groceries, they start buying things, they're giving money back to their friends, which they ask because they cannot live until end of the salary. So again, the system will flag you this as suspicious activity, but when manually you enter the system and you see that the guy is just spending his salary, for example. ATM, same with ATM withdrawals. Usually ATM withdrawals are high risk, but sometimes they make sense as well. Out of same situation, the person receives the salary or person receives funds from the family members and start ATM withdrawing it. If, for example, this happens in non-cash oriented European countries, that's suspicious. But even in Europe, we have cash oriented countries as Romania, so they use a lot of cash, and it's seem reasonable why person would withdraw suddenly half of their income.
Mm.
So, yes, the typical day is knowing red flags, knowing why the system was flagged, and trying to justify why this activity happens and why it's not suspicious. I would say that not the big percentage of it ends up as dangerous money laundering or terrorist financing. We have big percentage of false alerts.
So you correlate basically with other activities. So you see if they've had this
Yes.
done before, you see who these transactions are with, if they have been done in the past. So that kind of clears that red flag, is what I'm understanding.
Yes, you try to analyze the customer behavior. The customer could be interested in traveling. So if you suddenly see that he is ATM withdrawing money in Egypt, and you know that customer likes traveling, and actually you've seen some plane tickets or him paying in a coffee shop, even an airport, you don't suspect. But if out of nowhere the customer behavior is withdrawing total amounts in Egypt, you will find it. So system alerted you some suspicious behavior, and you're analyzing the customer behavior, the transaction behavior, account behavior. It's important as well, something you had in a different book. This is actually really important to analyze if there were no changes of email. If the person is having the email, which is, it's a red flag, it's not always bad, but for example, if you have John Smith, whose email is John Smith 12, it makes sense. But if his email is Greg Jonathan, that's one of the red flags. Analyzing IP. So you're taking a big picture of account, analyzing it, and trying to clarify. If you cannot clarify this, you're coming to the customer. Usually you have already QC, but if you're working, like for example, in crypto exchanges, yes, you request the QC, know your customer. If you don't understand where the money comes from, and there's a big amount, you're requesting source of funds and source of wealth and explanation why those transactions come. And this is actually the moment where we can understand what is really happening, when we actually start receiving money.
I want to interrupt you because you mentioned AI a few times at the beginning, and it sounds to me like a lot of the work that you're doing, and when we're talking about compliance specialists or compliance officers and AML officers, it's really about separating the noise from real threats and maybe false positives. And this seems like a huge, massive challenge. And obviously we have AI, but it can't do all of the lifting. In fact, it's probably important that it really takes a human eye in this process. And
Yes.
would you agree that you can't just rely on these algorithms to do most of the heavy lifting?
Yes, I agree. I say that AI helps us a lot because when I started to work at the beginning of my career, we did not have AI. We had that amount of manual work. We were manually creating alerts. We were reviewing much more. So we had much more false alerts. And so as well, there is not only transaction monitoring, there is screening, there is QC request. So this operational part is much bigger than it seems at the beginning. Before this, there were teams who were manually checking the name of the person. If this person is in sanction list, if this person is in Interpol, Europol, a wanted list. And you can imagine there's common names with those lists, and person were checking name by name, the photo, if there is a match with the date of birth, etc. Right now, the system does it for us.
Yeah, in a
So,
sense, because this has global reach and global effect, and obviously there are some cultures where the same first name and the same last name are common throughout the culture, and this makes it obviously more of a challenge. Let's pivot to your other specialty, which I think is an incredibly heavy topic, but it's also a very important topic, which is terrorist financing. And I think when we look in the compliance space, and maybe even specifically outside the compliance space, just from a thematic standpoint, people often conflate or equivalate money laundering and terrorist financing. But they're actually very different, or they can be very different. Could you explain that to us, Kateryna?
yes, for example, even in a compliance field with the training and educating new compliances, there's a lot of talks, trainings, thoughts, and experience with anti-money laundering. But the topic of anti-terrorism financing usually is not covered well. So even with a specialist, it's a tricky topic. And I think emotionally, intellectually, specialists are trying to avoid it. And nowadays, not only nowadays, I wouldn't say that the world is so bad. It was always bad. Now we have better systems to caught them. But yes, this topic is really avoided. Since university, I'm specializing in the topic. I'm trying to research it in all possible ways. The biggest difference is that the terrorism financing money are not always dirty money. How weird it wouldn't sound. Current terrorists and organizations have a lot of legal businesses. And when you start analyzing that, for example, you have a company and you deep dive with stakeholders, you go further, and actually you're coming to, for example, sanctioned person, sanctioned family, or the roots of this business, which don't really make sense, and they go for either high risk jurisdictions or known families and people who are actually in, again, coming back to Interpol, Europol search. Those organizations have legal and illegal businesses. And our job is to spot them in all possible and impossible ways. For example, in quite interesting fact that in UK, you saw that people are selling those fake bags a lot.
Yeah,
Yes,
annoying.
people are
Yeah.
coming. It happens in most of our, European and non-European countries. There's guys who are selling you fancy fake bags, like
Okay.
Dior bag for $5.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
never bought one.
Yeah, me
That's
neither.
good of you, and never do, please, because those business actually belong to one of the terrorist organizations.
Wow.
That's literally their business. So when you're buying a fake Dior bag, you're not just buying fake Dior bag, and your wife is clearly unhappy with that because it doesn't smell good. As well, you're sponsoring.
Okay, you're sponsoring terrorism, but there's a crucial distinction, right? So, first of all, for the amounts that are used to fund terror, as you mentioned with this bag, there are small amounts, so they're not necessarily large amounts that trigger large transaction reports or scrutiny. So they can be unlawful, lawfully obtained. For ML, money laundering, the funds are always dirty, right? You're not going to launder clean funds. The transactions can be very small. So what are the specific typologies or patterns that you're looking for to actually catch this versus AML, which is more direct and better filtered? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. Again, coming up with that, when I create training, I honestly don't like to create training those broad ones like anti-money laundering and terrorism financing and fraud. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Usually they're together, but they're not the same. Same with anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. It's not the same. Terrorism financing uses a lot of anti-money laundering, obviously, because even if you get clean money and your business makes clean money, you have to give it to not clean organization, places, and spend it on activities that shouldn't be. With this topic, it's actually more, when you spot anti-money laundering, you're learning how to see patterns. When you're trying to find terrorism financing, you're educating yourself in geography, I've heard that specialists out of the shopping lists were understanding what the person is trying to create. I would say watch a lot of documentaries, but no, you read constantly news. You're trying to understand how it works. You're following the person. So terrorism financing is more like investigation and more place of thinking and actually deep search. For me, triggers usually when I receive documents. When I see documents, in any crime, we're humans, we make mistakes, right?
Sure.
In crime, the same. In the movies, they show psychopaths geniuses. It's not really the truth. Psychopaths actually have low IQ. So you spot mistakes, unrelated geographies where it's coming. So the invoice, for example, is for, I don't know, Danish t-shirts. But those Danish t-shirts, surprisingly, are spent in high jurisdictions. More comes the investigation part, where, again, you have huge list of red flags.
So AML is pattern recognition, ATF is more investigative tool.
Yes.
So Kateryna, before we move on, because I think this is an interesting topic and I don't want to cut short on it, because I think when we're talking about this, it sounds to me that anti-terrorism financing leans or falls more into law enforcement, whereas AML typically tends to be a more compliance function. But my curiosity is, let's say your standard crypto exchange or your money processing platform, are they also responsible, and how much responsibility do they have in AML? How are they on the anti-terrorism financing part? Because they're not going to see receipts, right? They're not going to see shopping lists. They're not going to get into these kind of details. So what type of things are they seeing that maybe trigger going to law enforcement and saying, hey, we have these kind of suspicious things going on? Or maybe it's just simply, we've moved to the realm of money laundering, and now these are specific things that we're flagging. Then we take it to law enforcement. How are you seeing this? Is it overlapping? Is there very specific things that a company like an exchange can do or sees when it comes to anti-terrorism financing?
Of course, there's still, even crypto, it changed since we had it recently. It's not really anonymous anymore. So we still see the QC. We're, at the moment, we can see mainly what we need to see. So even if you don't have a shopping list, you see the jurisdictions. You have tools and possibilities to spot the jurisdictions. You can see the emails, and most important, you perform screening. And I'm telling screening with idea, like, I think that everyone knows it. No. Screening is when we have a name, details of the user, and we see if he's in lists or if he's connected to any of those people. So for example, when you screen and you have a wife of person in sanctions or a brother or a cousin, it still shows you that.
Right. So you're also tracking these. So if someone's on a PEP list, right, and they've been sanctioned, you can also then start to draw fingers to connected people in that. And I know there's a lot of great platforms.
There is wanted lists.
Great.
We have wanted lists. We have lists of the people who perform crime. As well, we have adverse media, which is as well important in our search, because in media we see this person has this kind of activity. So of course, not always adverse media is bad, so always double check, but adverse media shows you that I need to deep dive on this person. So this person has, let's say, tendency for some, let's say, ideas, ideologies, or activity. Some of the adverse media is, of course, fascinating. I had a guy with adverse media that when he was getting drunk, he was breaking windows of old people. I did not really suspect him anything except ATM withdrawals near Irish pubs.
Okay, fair enough.
Makes
I mean,
sense.
it's not funny that he's breaking windows, but that
No, but
deduction is
you
funny.
put two and two together, right? Too much Guinness and broken windows is probably a good correlation. Okay, guys, this has been awesome. Let's talk about future of the industry and what you're seeing, Kateryna. So we've talked about AI, right? We've talked about how sophisticated the terrorist financing can be. And the landscape is constantly changing between, let's say, new digital payment rails, shifts in geopolitics. I think criminals are always innovating. So for you, as a compliance professional, what is one trend in, let's say, transaction monitoring or anti-terrorism financing that is keeping you on your toes at the moment, right now?
A lot of things keep me on the toe. Intellectually, for example, we have to understand that not only we are getting more advanced, but the people who we're trying to spot are getting advanced as well, but they don't have bureaucracy. So for them, sometimes it's much easier. Their systems are simpler than ours. But again, they're getting advanced. They're getting good educations for interpretation. For example, if we come about terrorists, that they are not intellectual. No, they're smart. They have systems. They have good specialists working on them. So not only banks have specialists working on them, they have too. And we have to understand that as well. So
They
the
can use
person,
the same tools, right? Like they
they
access
use the same tools.
the same tools.
And they're changing. As well, the world environment right now is, I wouldn't say in crisis, but it's becoming more dangerous place because we are more connected to each other. It's more digital. The systems are not as local as they've been. If we compare the banking system of 2008 when the crisis happened and right now, it's much more different. We all so connected. We cannot act like, oh, there somewhere in another country far from me something happened, so as a financial specialist I'm not interested in that. You
Yeah.
are interested in that because if it happened there, soon it will come to you and all over the place, because we have
Yeah.
payments through countries, we have payment systems. We don't have transactions which are going for 3 days anymore. It comes with seconds. So you have more amounts. You have more threats, not only local. So all world situation should be part of your interest. You shouldn't ignore it. So yes, as a compliance, you have to actually, my partner recently asked me when you will stop studying, and I was like, when I will stop working.
Yeah, we gotta learn new things every. Look, Kateryna, this was very insightful, very useful. I have just before we let you go back to catching these bad guys. There's a lot of junior analysts maybe that will be watching this. What is your number one piece of advice for someone looking for specializing in this field, whether it's transaction monitoring or becoming a compliance officer like you?
First of all, realizing that we are always understaffed and overworked. So welcome to compliance.
That's why AMLI exists, by the way. One of the reasons. There's many reasons,
That's
but
why honestly
obviously
I'm
this.
not much afraid to lose my job. Everyone around me are in panic. Gaming in, for example, a lot of my friends are working in gaming industry, and oh my god, I take my job, and I'm like, I'm not afraid.
Yeah,
I'm
because
Yeah.
fine.
compliance is never going anywhere. This is the truth of the industry. We just saw BitMEX is shuttering its doors. Crypto exchanges are constantly shuttering their doors. Hike and I were having a long discussion about this prior to this call. But the reality is that you're going to continue to see downsizing, especially in a bear market. You're going to continue seeing even legacy exchanges, legacy payment processors closing their door because they just don't have the transaction volumes and the revenue of the bull market. And it's normal, it's cycles, right? But the one thing that maintains, the one thing you constantly have to have, no matter how small, large, no matter how much revenue you're bringing in, you have to maintain your compliance team. That's one of the reasons why
Absolutely.
I always get excited about what we do, but also fractional compliance in general, because it allows for companies to have highly professional, highly skilled frontline compliance workers without the large overhead that a $250,000 plus CAMLO will run you. And some of these teams are running two or three of these positions, and they're running dozens and dozens of agents underneath them. And if the volume goes down, they find it very hard to cut these people from institutional knowledge perspective, but also compliance perspective. So why put yourself through that when you can have a fractional service in the background that's doing the same heavy lifting, but at a fraction of the cost with as much expertise, if not more in most cases, and larger jurisdictional reach. So I think it's a no-brainer. I know that was a bit of a pitch there, but I think that's,
Nice plug, David. It's good. It's
yeah,
good.
no, I think it fires me up a little bit because I look at the industry and
Yeah.
I think this is constantly happening. The one area you're not cutting back on is compliance, good for you, but you can have that same coverage at a fraction of the cost. Why are you doing this? Why are you spending millions and millions of dollars on that when you can do it for a fraction of cost with just as much or better expertise with a team like ours? So anyway, I totally went off the rails there. Guys, this has been probably one of my favorite calls because I love this topic. The topic of anti-terrorism financing, the topic of what people are doing on the ground. Kateryna, you're so important, not to just AMLI, but the financial industry in general. Because if we look at every major global conflict happening right now on the planet, every major terrorist group out there, there is someone like you, Kateryna, that's in the background trying to stop them, whether directly, intentionally, or that's just what flags are coming across your desk. And we appreciate the work that you're doing, not only at AMLI, but I think for the global financial community. I don't know, Heike, you want to add some words and then we can close it out?
Juniors, because we need them so much.
Yeah.
You want to
So,
continue the conversation?
in other places, they don't want juniors. We want juniors. But with
Yeah.
our job, actually, it's first of all about educating yourself and having soft and hard skills.
Yeah.
Skilling, training, nonstop. So even if you're going for a junior position and you already showing that I went for this course, you can reply on questions, and the questions during the even first interviews are: what is anti-money laundering? What type? What is typology of money laundering? For example, if you want to enter transaction monitoring or risk-based investigation, go through training and show that you've learned and Now you have a knowledge. So the company sees that you just didn't randomly come and in 3 months you will leave with a burnout. But you have a knowledge and you want to practice it.
And
So
what would you say? I've heard Tigran, our CEO, say a bunch of times, somebody with a criminal mind that wants to do anti-money laundering has more chances of having success than, let's say, an accountant, right? Like somebody that is
yes,
not doesn't
that's
have
for
that
sure.
criminal mind. So
Yes, for sure.
you agree with that? That's a pretty cool thing. So basically, if anybody out there is looking for work in compliance, it's not that complicated to start. And actually, Kateryna here, she's the one that makes our trainings that you see on our website. Here, I'll do my plug-in here to David. On AML Incubator's website, there are a lot of trainings, and Kateryna's the person in charge of building those trainings. So there you go. You have a place to start, and they're not very expensive.
I'm actually trying to do them as practical as possible because, again, I'm not a random trainer. I'm actually the person who is doing the field. So I'm doing the maximum to show the real case studies, the actual red flags, not red flags from the old book, because the times of checklist of compliance ended. So even in regulations, in recommendations, in trainings, I'm trying to explain those red flags. And yes, we don't do the checklist anymore. You're not entering account and saying, there's no ATM withdrawals. It's not suspicious. Oh no. Regulators, nobody will think that way. They will say, you missed.
Yeah, so true. That's so true. They're not going to give you a free ride and just say, okay, sorry about that. Guys, Kateryna, thank you so much again for sharing
Thank
your
you.
expertise. Again, this has been one of my favorite calls, and I'm looking forward to diving into more compliance issues on future vlogs with the AML Incubator. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Like and comment below.